Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of our weekly Exploring the Parasha class with Rabbi Rebecca Schatz and Rabbi Matt Shapiro.
Folks may or may not remember that we had said when we were coming to the end of Breshit that we were going to do like the last psukim of a book. We did it for that one. And then we made it to the end of Shemot, but we didn't do it for that one because it didn't seem like there was that much to talk about. But 2 out of 3 ain't bad. We're going to do it this week. However, upon further examination, these verses may or may not have been a little more complicated than we thought they were, but we're going to do our best. And I am confident through our conversation together, we will find some good stuff. So it is a double parsha this week, Behar-Bechukotai. 13
my ordination parsha.
My half of my, or including my bar mitzvah parsha. So not yet Rabbi Matt Shapiro, as a squeaky voiced 13-year-old, chanted much of Behar on Memorial Day weekend 1997. So here we are. But Behar-Bechukotai, we wrap up the book of Vayikra, and we wind up this last chapter has a number of pieces that are not, even when you think about what was happening in the realm of priestly service and the sacrificial system, are pieces that, at least to me, are not particularly familiar and kind of eyebrow raising in their in their content. So I'll just sort of offer that broad frame as we move through the chapter in relatively short order. So the first chunk of the chapter, these first few verses, are fascinatingly, like you see in verse 2, that Moses is saying, right, God says to Moses, saying, speak to the Israelite people, when anyone explicitly vows to the Lord the equivalent for a human being. So basically an offering to the priests, right, to those who are in charge of the sacrificial system, to I'm going to give you the full value of myself. And then it goes through over these next few verses talking about basically how much person is worth, right? Like if you make that commitment, how much you give based on who you are, which is not a construct that I was all that familiar with. And obviously, if we were to be delving into those verses, offers a lot of opportunity for conversation about that concept in general and those categories and how, what that even means, deciding upon the worth of a person. So there's a lot there in terms of that concept. We are not going to be exploring those verses in too much depth today, but Rabbi Schatz, when we're doing this again next year, maybe those are the verses that we'll look at. How does that sound? Great. Then get into more about if you're going to do that with an animal. And here in verse 10, you're going to see an idea that comes back in the verses that we're going to be looking at more carefully, this idea of not substituting, right? That if there is an animal that is being brought, that the vow has been made on, you can't switch them out. It needs to be that specific animal. And going through again, whatever the vow is made on, that is the animal that needs to be dedicated. Similarly, in terms of if you are dedicating your house, that there's a sense that of how you would do that. So basically going through this system of not because you have done something for which you need atonement, but if you, as an Israelite, back in the day, wanted to make some kind of contribution to the temple, to the priestly class, and you wanted to offer yourself or your animal or your house in some kind of way, going through the details of how that would work. There's a reference here in terms of the land in the Jubilee year, which we read much more about in my bar mitzvah parsha, Parshat Behar, but we're not going to get too much into that in this moment. And now we are sort of tiptoeing into the chunk O verses that we're going to be looking at today. So starting in verse 26, this idea that the firstborn of animals, whatever animal belongs to God, in whatever, right, of whatever type, clean or unclean, and all that anyone owns, if something has been set aside, then it needs to be dedicated to God. I will say, like, very clearly, I don't fully understand how these pieces work. In terms of the tithing and the firstborn and what's prescribed and what's set aside. Like I said, these verses ended up being more complicated than I thought they would be. I have more to say about our verses specifically. There was clearly a real system happening here in terms of what would be sort of swapped in and out and the percentages thereof, and 20% here. It is not stuff with which I'm particularly familiar, though I'm sure Rabbi Schatz is, and I will take her silence as agreement that she could be doing a much better job explaining these verses than I am. Thank you, Rabbi Schatz. And coming here towards the end, so we're going to be looking at verses 32, 33, 34. 32 and 33 bring this topic to a close, and 34 sort of provides an interesting coda to the Parsha and book, which, depending on how you read it, may or may not be directly connected with the verses that immediately precede it. So in verse 32, it says, bakar letzon, all of the tithes, right, because you're supposed to tithe 10% at baseline, all of the tithes of the herd or flock, these sheep, goats, kol asher ya'avor tachat hashavet, anything that passes under the staff, ha'asiri yakodesh ladonai. So literally think about, like, I'm having my flock, because I'm a shepherd, I'm having my flock pass before me, and I'm counting to 10, which I'm able to do. And every time I say 10, that one is consecrated and set aside for the temple. Just each 10% of that goes. Lo yivaker bein tov l'ra velo yamirenu. And I find this concept is something that caught my eye. You can't pick and choose, right? You can't decide, oh, this one's a good one. I'm gonna count really quickly. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So I don't have to give like the one that I don't want to give. Nor, and I saw some pieces on this, giving the volume away a little bit. Nor if I'm a particularly temple committed and oriented Jew, as I am known to be, shepherd that I am in ancient Israel, who is able to count to 10, nor can I make sure to like count differently so that a not so good one goes, but a particularly good one goes, right? Whatever the 10 is on, that's the one that goes. You shouldn't substitute it out. V'im hamar yimerenu v'hayahu utmurato yakodesh lo igael. But if I were to, and it's always interesting when, don't do it, but if you do, if I were to do that, then both are dedicated, right? The one that I counted to 10 on and the one that I went out of my way to send, then actually both of those, right? I sort of forfeit both of those over to the temple, and you can't swap out one for the other. And those two are bound up and both are dedicated. A little bit on ancient tithing, which I know everyone was hoping to learn a little bit about today. And then the last verse of the book, these are the mitzvahs, these are the commandments that God mitzvahified, that God commanded, spoke, dictated to Moses, to the people of Israel at Har Sinai. Chazak, chazak, we did it, Joe. We made it. Hooray for the book of Vayikra. Rabbi Schatz, over to you.
Yes, Rabbi Shapiro.
Yes, over to you. Thank you for your explanation on how tithing works.
You did a great job. Okay, any kushiyot? Any? I mean, I feel like there are gazillions of questions to ask about this. One being, but there's also a lot. There's also a lot to ask very specifically. When Rabbi Shapiro reminded me not so very long ago what our verses were for today, I looked at them and I thought, okay, yeah, all right. Well, I'll be asking questions and hopefully
we got this. We're going to close out Vayikra strong. It's going to be great.
Oh yeah, no, that's what I meant. Okay, so does anybody have any kushiyot? I can only see one at a time currently, but yes, Karen, go ahead.
You took the words out of my mouth. Why I would say to Michael, hey, God's going to see what I just did. And he said, you think he's looking just at you? And that's what I feel here. Picky, 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 picky. Why? I don't get it. What is all this?
So are you talking about the ritual? Or are you talking about even the need to connect to God needs to come through this kind of?
Yeah. The 10th sheep, why
all the detail? Why the specifics? Why is this the way?
Yeah, you got it. Right.
Great.
Or as you said, huh?
Yeah. That's my big question. Elon.
Yeah, verse 33 completely confuses me. I'm not sure what it means because on the one hand, he says he must not look out for good against bad or make substitution for it. But if he does make substitution for it, then it and its substitute shall both be holy. Well, I'm not quite sure. First of all, why shouldn't you make a substitution? If it's really that bad to make a substitution, making it holy, that's bad. That's like the punishment. It makes no sense to me whatsoever. So if somebody could clarify what that means, I would be greatly appreciative.
I don't know that I can, but I'm going to try. But Rabbi Shapiro had a banana this morning, so his brain is probably working better than mine. So he can let us know.
Potassium.
I think that what it's saying is that they would both be holy, but the last part, it cannot be redeemed, means that you wouldn't be able to sacrifice it. So I think that what it's trying to get at is that the punishment wouldn't be that now neither are quote acceptable. The punishment is that you can't do anything with them even if they are acceptable. At least that's how I understand it. I have absolutely no idea if that's true, but that's how I understand it. I agree with you though that why would you add that something could be made okay or even more than okay, kadosh, if you do the opposite of what is being asked of you.
So don't do this, but if you do it, don't worry about it. Okay, yeah. Thanks.
Right.
Which, by the way, is a hallmark of rabbinic literature, right? We have that all the time, right? We have the lehatchila and b'diavad constructs in rabbinic literature all the time, right? If you do this, right, if you're going to think about in advance how you should do this, here's how you should do it. But if this happens, like you can still be like patur, you can still be exempt from what you would have had to do if you did it on purpose.
You just don't get the highest level reward.
Right, but this is not suggesting an accidental. It's not like typically in rabbinic, right? It would be like, all right, if you screw up and do it, don't sweat it because it's not the worst thing in the world. This is
right.
If you do make a substitution, you're not going to randomly make a substitution. You're going to consciously make a substitution.
Right.
It's just, and when you said it cannot be redeemed, so in other words, what would that mean? I bring a goat, or they told me to bring a cow, instead I bring a goat. Now it can't be redeemed. What does that mean that it can't be redeemed?
I think, to clarify first the holiness piece, I don't think holiness here is like, like holy. It's like, hooray, it's like, something worthy of worship. I think holy here is like something that is now specifically in the category of something that belongs to the temple and the priests, right? It's not like an elevated thing, like it has now attained holiness. It's rather a category of something that belongs elsewhere, right? That's my sense of it. In terms of it cannot be redeemed, I think, and we're all working together on this. My sense of it cannot be redeemed is sort of like, think about Pidyon Haben, right? Like, so because I'm the firstborn, we're learning all sorts of things about Rabbi Matt Shapiro today. I was redeemed at Pidyon Haben. I should be working real hard in the temple these days, but for a host of reasons I'm not, because my parents decided I was worth 5 silver shekels, which is still up for debate. But because of that, right? Like I was redeemed, right? I got like swapped out for the silver coins. So I think here too, right? Like those two animals are now like locked in, right? Like and then like if I tried to do the old switcheroony with my bulls, but I got caught doing it, I can't then be like, well, can I buy one of them back? Both bulls, both Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen belong to the temple. Even if I wanted to swap Scottie for Michael, which is a terrible decision I have to make. But like if I tried doing that, right, then I wouldn't be able to get either of them back. That's what I think.
Yeah, I agree. Jay.
Well, the interesting thing to me is this verse 34. These are the commandments that the Lord gave Moses for the Israelite people on Mount Sinai. When I read this, I thought that happened a long time before Leviticus. And my question is, does this mean everything that's happened during Leviticus is something that's already happened? Or is this line just reminding us that we were given the commandments on Mount Sinai, but we didn't just get them from Mount Sinai right now?
Great. It's a great question, and you are correct. So this line has happened actually twice before, and will happen again. But yeah, what is the timeline here? What does that mean for the commandments that before were said to have been given to us on Mount Sinai? Are we just adding, or are we just is it just being revealed to us more along the way? Is this trumping those, what is it that we're learning from this line being added yet again at this point in our Torah? Great question. Nancy.
So sorry to go back to 33 again, but I hear you're saying that in rabbinic literature, right, it's common to hear, so if you did the wrong thing, here's what happened. I just think it's really interesting to hear it in the Torah, that we would assume that people would do the wrong thing, and because they're being commanded by God. So I don't know, it's just something about that seems strange to me.
Yeah, I don't even know how to respond to that other than yes, I agree. And it's interesting, I was just looking at it while you were asking your question. It's interesting that there's no response to if you look out for the good against the bad, right? Because it's saying here that you should not choose between the good and the bad, but then it does assume that people will make those substitutions. So does that mean that people won't choose between the good and the bad if they're told not to, or that there is just a higher punishment if you were to do that, so we're not going to mention it? I always think of kids when you say don't do this and then you tell them why, well, that's going to make them want to do it. So if you're saying to the people here, if you do make a substitution, then this is what's going to happen. Well, then why wouldn't you just make that substitution? Because you see that, as Ilana was pointed out to us, like doesn't seem to really matter. And maybe it's actually even good, right? And not even bad. Yeah, it's a great question.
I was going to say, I do think it's interesting. I don't know if others can. I can't think of any off the top of my head, like where within the same verse in the Torah, it's like, this is what you should do, but if you don't, do this instead, right? And it might, that's not to say there isn't, but I can't think of any. It's particularly interesting when we've already envisioned a less than ideal scenario, and then the verse immediately afterwards, which is being repeated, and of course we know there's no verse, word, letter in the Torah by accident, right? That it goes out of its way to then assess these are the commandments, right? I didn't find anything on that, right? I didn't find anything specifically connecting the scenario described in 33 with why 34 then happens. But for me, thematically, I think it's interesting to see verse 33, like laying out a scenario, laying out what's going to happen if you don't do what you're supposed to do. Oh, by the way, remember, these are the commandments that you were given at Mount Sinai, right? I think that's an interesting 1, 2, 3 lined up like that.
Joanna, you're muted. There you go.
Two things. In terms of this whole business of the substitution, I'm noticing that the verb yeh is singular, right? And it says, v'hayahu utmurato. So there's two things. The thing and its substitution will both be holy. which to me suggests that maybe it should take the plural verb. And so I'm feeling like sort of the verse is saying is they're going to be treated as one holy thing together, the two. So, might as well just stick to the one. And I'm wondering also if this is therefore more of like a warning than describing what actually happened. So it's saying, you're going to have your order and it's going to be every 10th one. And don't try to make a substitution, because if you do, it will end up that both go to God and not just one. And about the last verse, you kind of want the book to end on a dramatic, powerful note. Sorry, I should get some water. If you were to ask me before looking at this, how does the book of Leviticus end? Like, totally fuzzy, no idea, right? Like, this is sort of a letdown for the end of the book. So the very last verse reads to me almost as like, we've got to put like that final, like, coda on the whole book of Leviticus, because otherwise there's kind of no ending to it. You're saying it's sort of a fizzle of an ending if you just sort of it can't be redeemed. Shabbat shalom, the end. Yeah. That's right. Maybe it's just literary style, right? Like these are works of literature, right? You always want to close with a bang, like Adon Olam brings the house down, and Kiddush, right, Rabbi Schatz?
Yep. Any other? I'm glad that you know that Adon Olam goes at the end of davening. That was very good.
It's been a while, man.
Anybody have any other kushiyot before I turn this over to the man who knows about Adon Olam? Okay. Over to you, Adon Olam, man. You're muted, but this is fun.
You almost said over to you, Adon Olam, which would have been really quite...
No, I was going to say Adon Olamer, and then realized that was weird, so I said Adon Olam man is what I was going to do.
Yep. I found two different teachings from the Lubavitcher Rebbe on the verse that is sort of puzzling our brains a bit, that take it in more of an allegorical direction in terms of this idea of substitution. So like I said when I was going through the verses, in addition to sort of per Jay's question being intrigued, confused, mildly befuddled as to why like that last verse kind of gets repeated and repeated again, and what, if any, connection it has with the verses that immediately precede it. I think this idea of substitution, and I guess I hadn't even thought too much before the conversation that we've been having over the past 10 minutes or so about the sort of interesting retroactive, like, but if you do all that much, but the idea of substituting good for bad or bad for good, to me connects with like the idea on some level of like acceptance and letting go a bit, right? Like whatever you're supposed to bring, that's what you bring, right? Like whatever you count 10 on, that's what you offer. And there's a certain amount of letting go and acceptance there, that I think is interesting, that I think is kind of like right, it's like right beneath the surface there in a way that I don't often see in Psukim. And these two teachings that I found from the Lubavitcher Rebbe on this verse, which was the only stuff I found that took it in a more allegorical direction, seem to be pointing in like, if not in completely opposite directions, it's at a very obtuse angle. And so that's always interesting to find those particularly ones from the same teacher. So the first one was, and this is the direction that I would have taken it in if I were to.
Can you share it?
All the visual learners in the house say ho. All right, here we go. Okay.
Tal asked me if you were going to sing, so I'm glad that you made her day.
I thought she just wanted me to sing my bar mitzvah parsha. Is what I.
Oh, is that what she meant? Oh.
Yeah, I think so. This one is shorter. The next one is a bit longer, but I'm happy to help out the visual learners in the virtual room.
Thank you.
So this was the first one where he says, every person was born to a mission in life that is distinctly, uniquely, and exclusively their own. No one, not even the greatest of souls, can take his or her place. No person who ever lived or whoever will live can fulfill that particular aspect of God's purpose in creation in his stead. So when you think about this idea of, Karen, like you were saying, like, why is God so picky, right? Like who cares? Throw some animals at the guy, like whatever. The Lubavitcher Rebbe is reading in this that there really is a different purpose and role for each, in the verse, animal, but extrapolating that out for each person. And it's not on us to say that one person should be doing something that someone else is doing, or that anyone even really can, right? This idea that everyone has their own place and their own role and their own mission to fulfill. It connects with a passage that I often cite, written by Rabbi Dean Steinsaltz, alav shalom, who talks about how each person has a place in the garden in the world, right? You think of the world as a garden, and each person has their own chunk of it, right? Their own sort of square of it to care for. And my part of the garden is mine and only mine, just like your part of the garden is yours and only yours. And you can't take care of my garden for me, and I can't take care of yours, right? That I have a certain mission, right, or a certain role to play in the world that no one else can like tag in or out for, and that's why this concept is being put forth, which I think is a lovely concept, and B, I don't think necessarily too much of a stretch in terms of what's being offered. So curious to hear if that if that helps anyone, doesn't help anyone with the verse that's making us all scratch our heads a little bit.
I just think it's kind of a cop-out. Like, I think it's an easy...
What do you mean a cop-out? It's a drive. What do you mean it's a cop-out?
No, I just mean, like, it's very easy to say, well, you can't boo me.
No, I'm saying you're booing the Lubavitcher Rebbe.
Yeah, I am.
How
but he's not
you?
Here. It's okay. I give the Lubavitcher Rebbe, like, more airtime than he would expect me to give him, so it's okay. I just think that it's interesting that that in thinking about not switching them out, that we are now comparing that to how people are unique in the world. Like, we're not talking about saying you're going to take this person and that person and equate them and give them the same kind of opportunities. We're talking about animals. So as much as I love animals and I care for animals and I think that they deserve rights as well, I don't think they're like humans. And there is, there is quality when it comes to an animal, especially back in those times where you were using your animal for everything. And so I don't know. I think this is just a stretch. Maybe
we're gonna have protesters from PETA outside Temple Beth all week next week, Rabbi Schatz, where they're just gonna be like walking around and be like, Rabbi Schatz doesn't think animal.
Yeah, that's what I just said. But I just think that maybe it's just a stretch. Maybe it's not a cop-out. Maybe it's just a stretch to compare this scene to the comparison of human life, personally.
Yeah, I get that. I mean,
I like it, though. I like the message.
It's obviously an allegory, right? It's obviously an allegory. I think feeding it back in through the lens of like the theme that I was seeing in it, though, it's like if you see it and I like it. It's part of why I brought it. And I do think, I think it might be like shimmying the dresser through the door that's only just wide enough for it to fit, but I think it still fits through the doorway, right? Like I think the concept, like through the prism of like acceptance and just sort of being okay with what is, for me, that also connects with this idea of like, I am I, you are you. We each have a part to play. Like, I need to let go of like trying to live your life for you because I'm me and vice versa, hopefully, right? And this idea that like things transpire in such a way that are in my control. I wanted to keep that bowl. That bowl's not for me, right? It turns out that the purpose of that bull is actually to be sacrificed at the temple, right? That's what that animal's for. Bull number 11, that's going to be my go-to. What are bulls for? For the matadors. I don't know. What do bulls do? Whatever it is bulls do, that's the bull for me. But not bull number 10. And that's okay, right? So I think if particularly for what you're saying in terms of how animals held such a vital function in an agrarian society, every animal really did have a purpose, whether it was dinner or plowing or whatever it is, like really did have a purpose. So I think you can feed it in that way. Joanna's laughing at how I don't know what a bull does, but
it just like carried stuff, It's like a carry, and
is
then
that
you
correct,
killed
Joanna?
it.
Can you testify to the veracity?
And then you killed it, and then you ate it. I mean, it's like what every other animal,
Rabbi Schatz, we don't eat every animal. I don't know if you know.
Yeah,
There's actually a whole list of them in the Torah that we're not allowed.
That was a few Parashiyot ago, yeah. I don't know. I guess I'm curious what Elon thinks, because I think that it most directly speaks to his conundrum.
I also have something that basically not totally contradicts it, but goes very much in the other direction, or in a different direction from the Lubavitcher Rebbe. So maybe you'll like Lubavitcher Rebbe to electric rabbi Lou, but we can stick with this one for a moment.
I will just say, the Lubavitcher Rebbe was in my ordination speech. I don't not like the Lubavitcher Rebbe, but I just didn't think this was particularly great.
I actually usually like the Lubavitcher Rabbi. I'm just confused. So it doesn't clarify it for me. It's just why can't we just say it's confusing and leave it at that?
Because there's nothing in the Torah by accident, Elon. Haven't you learned that by now? Nothing is in there by accident. Elon doesn't believe me. Look at that.
Well, even if one believes that it's divinely inspired, is it not possible that God, whoever God might be or whatever God might be, just said, you know what, I'm going to screw with these people a little bit and put this in and kind of let them try to figure it out, but there is no answer, and see what kind of fakakta answers they're able to come up with.
That's a real thing. I don't remember if I brought it. I'm looking to see if I brought it. I didn't. One of the commentaries that I came across. Oh no, I did. Okay, hold on. Let me share it with you.
Found a traditional commentary that said God is just messing with us.
Sort of. It's this like secret part. Hold on. Let me show you.
Which, by the way, Elon, if that is the case, would be giving it a reason, right? It circles back around in on itself. Because if there's really no reason for it, then it wouldn't have been put there to just mess with us.
Okay, this is for the last verse, but it explains why that verse is there based on the things that come before it. So
That's
it's
not what this. I saw this. That's not what. Come on. Okay, fine. You go.
Go. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So Ibn Ezra says, I've explained this earlier in this Torah portion. The person who has the intelligence to understand the secret of the world will understand the secret of the firstborn and the tenth. Abraham gave a tithe, our father Jacob, blah, blah. If the one who has no second will help me, then I will reveal part of the secret when I mention the second tithe. That's Ibn Ezra speaking, by the way, not God. The book of Leviticus is completed. Thank you very much. We're going to move on. I think Rabbi Matthew Isaiah Shapiro, I think
Yes.
that this is saying what Elon was getting at, which is if you understand what's going on, more power to you. You are closer to this than I am. And Ibn Ezra is also saying this guy did it and this guy did it and I don't get it and we're going to move on to numbers, right? I think that that's what's happening here. I think that Ibn Ezra is pointing out that this secret, this sod that he's talking about here, it's not actually a secret because we've heard about it, but it is hard to understand and something that you only would understand if you were kind of on the in. I think. But you don't think that I'm right. Anyway.
I see what you're saying. I agree that he's naming how it is confusing, which, just for those keeping score at home, it is. I also think there was, a type of writing in rabbinic literature, particularly you see most common in Rambam, where like he winds stuff around when he's almost like trying not to explain it to you because he doesn't think. I bet Ibn Ezra has a better explanation than he's letting on here, right? Like I bet if you were to actually sit down with him and say, like, what is this? I think he would have a real answer. I think he's sort of cloaking it a bit because he doesn't think it's.
But even if he, and then I'll call on Elon, but even if he has even if he has more of an answer, the fact that he knows that I'm going to be reading it in 2021, and well, not me, probably you.
Know what 2021 is.
That some guy would be reading it in 2021 and not understand it. I think that's what he's getting at, which is you might not understand this. I'm getting very worked up about this. You might not understand this when you are as far away from it as you are going to be when you read it, and that's okay. And I think that's what he's saying is like, this is something you should listen to, but it's okay if you don't really understand it. Elon.
So I'd be curious, and this would help me with the interpretation of Ibn Ezra, if his commentary at the end of every book says, and this is the end.
Yes.
It does. Because I was going to suggest, because the way that reads is, listen, this is like completely straight
This is the end. This is the end. This is where I get off.
If you understand this, please share your drugs with me, and let's move on, right? Yeah. This is the end of it, like next. But if that's the way, in fact, ends every...
I believe so. I can quickly check, but I believe so.
Yeah, I think I have it over there. I can look. But I think so. Yeah, Karen.
Every kid is taught in school. The paragraph starts with your main sentence and ends with, and therefore, it's like tying those two sentences together. Just saying.
Yeah.
Grammatically and syntactually, God knew what he was doing.
Yeah.
Not that I understand what he did. That's how it works.
I will also say I think he's naming something that goes a little beyond the scope of the specific verses that we're looking at, which doesn't help either way, but just to give a little bit of context, which is to say that if you scroll up earlier, it says that you're supposed to give the first one, right? Remember the 5 silver coins, right? Whatever it was. And now it's saying you should give the 10th one, but you're supposed to give 10%. So how can you get right? 10 times 2 is 20, not 10. So you're supposed to give 10%, but you're giving 20%. I clicked on a little cheek there. It seems like he's referring to that specific conundrum, which is also confusing, right? Like it's not resolved. Like how can you be giving 10% and 20% at the same time? Rabbi Schatz knows, but she's not willing to tell us, and she's just playing it off.
No, I was looking for the Ibn Ezra thing. Ibn Ezra doesn't have a commentary at the end of Shemot, so I don't know if he does at the end of Bereshit, but I was just looking to see.
Like the note says, if you start from the top, then 1 is the first number. If you start from below, then there behold, 10 is the first number. This is the secret of the firstborn and the
because
top.
I think the way that I understood it was that. The way that I understood it was that like you have a rod and like the sheep are going, or in your case the bull is going underneath, right? And it's like number 1, number 2, but number 1 was also the 10th of the one before. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I got distracted looking at Ibn Ezra. He doesn't end he has a comment on the last verse of Bamidbar, but he doesn't say this is the end of the book of Bamidbar.
Right. I think it's unique to Leviticus because he doesn't even have a commentary at the end of Shemot.
Right, because why would he say this is the end? Of course it's the end, but he's trying to, I think he's saying, listen guys, I don't even want to try to explain it. This is the end. Let's go on, right? There's no reason to say this is the end when it is obviously the end, right?
Right.
Unless he's like, okay, I've had enough.
Yeah. Are you, Shapiro, are you hoping to bring something else, or can I bring us something?
I was going to bring the other Lubavitcher Rebbe.
Yeah. Bring the Lubavitcher Rebbe too, and then I'll bring the other thing.
Okay, you got it. It's a longer piece, but I think the idea can be can be offered up relatively straightforwardly. So this goes in the other direction, right? Like he said in the last thing, he's saying every person has their own place, role, unique job to do in this world. But here he gets into the idea of how the like two sort of get bound up together, and he refracts it through an interesting construct. So he says mystically, so Rabbi Schatz, it's mystical. So you're very excited to hear that, I know. He says mystically, substituting one animal for another refers to the worthy endeavor of changing the mundane into holiness. It's a really nice idea, I think. With regard to one's fellow human being, so again, right, analogizing, but still, this means bringing someone who is estranged from his soul back into it, revealing to him his connection to God. So this idea of if you're going to swap an animal in and out, it's this idea of how something that wouldn't be brought can be made kadosh. And so now he's applying it to the construct of one person relating to another and basically bringing him back. And he says two things. The person effecting the substitution must actually perform two substitutions in this process. So it's a double move. Number one, he, the person effecting that, must first enter the realm of the person he's seeking to help, descending from his loftier preoccupations, and substitute his spiritual ivory tower for the mundane world. Two, he can then elevate the other person, replacing, in quotes, his estrangement from God with holiness, right? So there's the holy one and there's the not holy one, right? Just like in our verse, the holy one sort of gets bundled back up with the other one, and then together they can then get joined so that they're both kadosh. If we find ourselves reluctant to leave the safe environs of holiness, which we all obviously live in, and enter the mundane world in order to elevate those in it, and there's some like very Chabadnik-y construct happening here, right? To elevate those in it, the Torah reassures us by telling us this, that both it and its replacement will be holy. Both we and that which we replace elevate to holiness and will be holy. We will not be denigrated by our descent into worldliness, and whatever and whomever we elevate will remain within the realm. So very different way of sort of, finding a message in that verse, right? The one sort of the role of the individual, and there's a very relational way of thinking about it, of how sort of like two parties get bundled together and move towards holiness. So I think this is an interesting idea. I think there's some lovely pieces to it. And I think it's also interesting that one rabbi can teach two different teachings on the same verse with very, very different like thematic anchors. Okay.
Well, it's it reminds me of what Rabbi Ingber said on Shabbat about Psalm 148, that it's not just about that which is the Shamayim, but also how you bring the Shamayim down to Haaretz. And that those things that we might think are holy can actually affect that which we think is mundane and vice versa. I don't know. I have to think.
And that it's dynamic, right? That it's not absolute.
Right, exactly. I would have to think about it more, but I like this one more, I think. Rabbi Shapiro just froze, but he agrees with me because obviously. Okay. So it's funny because we're both using the same internet. We're both at Temple Beth Am. So if his internet froze, you might be stuck with none of us. Okay. I am going to share another piece. Unless anybody else wants to say something about the Lubavitcher piece. Anybody want to? No? Okay. Yeah, Joanna, go ahead.
Your comparison to Psalm 148 and Rabbi Ingber's comments are interesting because as he was talking about that, I had my Siddur open and was rereading the Psalm. And so the first half of the Psalm, which talks about Min Shamayim, is like all lofty and beautiful. But in the second half of the Psalm, there's also fire and snow and winds and storms along with the beautiful things. Mm-hmm. So now it's interesting to think of that in light of like this commentary and a little bit about like, you can't live it all in the ivory tower. Like you've got to bring holiness to earth, and it's going to be a little bit messy sometimes, but that's life.
And also that, to go back to the kind of the ambiguity of the verse itself, just this idea that, I'm just going to pull it up so I can see it, that uchmorato hiya kodesh, right? That it's not just that it's going to be one thing is either made profane, really, not even mundane, and the other thing is made holy because of the substitution, but the holiness kind of seeps one into the other, making both hopefully just as holy, not taking away any holiness from the other, but allowing them both to be holy. It's interesting. I tend to agree with Elon that why mention that unless you think that it's okay to do it, even after saying don't do it. But I like the idea in general, the love which Rabbi is bringing out. Rabbi Shapiro, now that you're back, do you want to say anything else on it?
I'm sure I missed really good stuff when I briefly got booted out. No, I was just going to say, I mean, I don't know what, let me give you a lead in. What are you going to be talking about? And I'll do whatever I'm going to say as a lead in to what you're going to say.
I'm going to bring in a chizkuni piece about choosing. Does that help?
Probably not. I'll just say that I'll do my best. No, like you just mentioned in passing, like the construct of like the ideal and real again, and in terms of, I think that's also an interesting piece in terms of the second Lubavitcher Rebbe piece. You know, that ideally we're all in a state of holiness, and we are often not. And again, that is a dynamic process rather than just one or the other. Yeah. And also interesting thematically that reflecting that back in the verse, there are two things here, right? The way that you should do things and the way that sometimes people actually do things. So I think there's a lot of thematic parallels there in terms of that gap and how you respond to that and how you might go about closing it. Are you bringing chizkuni so you can conclude with chazak, v'nit chazek? Because that would be awesome.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay.
Bring it home, Rabbi Schatz.
I had not thought of that, but sure. Okay, so one of the things that I was really struck by in these verses is all of the kind of randomness, right? The fact that the 10th one, the 10th animal, I'm not convinced it was a bull, but the 10th animal would go underneath this staff, and that all of a sudden that was just what they were dealing with. It just kind of moves away from anything I understand about the Torah and how specific the Torah typically is in terms of like cutting off this limb, and then you burn this part, and then you eat that part, and then these ashes become for that. And it's usually very specific. And that seems to be quite random. And so is the next verse, right? That you cannot look for the good versus the bad. And I was really struck with that because, as I think I've mentioned here before, I'm very interested when it comes to like choosing a path of Judaism that I'm most interested in. I love studying halakha, and one of the pieces of halachic Judaism that specifically relates to Shabbat is when you are eating on Shabbat or doing really anything, but it mostly comes up with food. There's something called borer, and you're not supposed to choose out from your plate that which is good versus that which is bad. So the prime example is if you're eating peas and carrots, if you only like carrots on Shabbat, you can't move the peas away because you can't separate the good from the bad. You can eat around it, but you can't separate them. Rabbi Shapiro is loving this because he does not care one iota about this.
It's just hilarious to me that like you'll come at verses from the Torah with like, what is this doing here? And you're like, ooh, peas and carrots.
I didn't specifically think about peas and carrots. I'm using that as an example. but thank you. Yes. So I was very I was really taken with that as something that came across. This is really not helpful that you just brought that up because now it's all I can think of. So I brought this chizkuni piece that I think has to do with choice in general, and why choice might be important, but also why randomness might be just as exceptional in this particular case. So ha'asiri hiya kodesh. So this is from the first verse here where it says tachat hashavet ha'asiri hiya kodesh l'Adonai, that after going underneath the rod, the 10th, once you count 1, 2, 3, the 10th will be declared holy. If someone while counting erroneously called the 9th the 10th, right? So if you were just counting and you're counting so many animals that by accident you say 10 after 8 as opposed to 9, or you called the 11th the 10th because you said 1 twice or whatever, the person is taken by their word, and that animal also becomes holy, and the animal is offered as a peace offering. And this isn't like so novel. I mean, especially given the whole conversation that we had about, you're not supposed to do this, but even if you do it, it still becomes holy. And I think it is really interesting that it's much more about the human than it is about the animal. Because if you count incorrectly, that's not the issue, right? The issue is not the right word. The reason for all of this is the sacrifice of the animal. So if you are doing that action, right, it's just like giving grades to students. If you've done the project and you did your best work, then why would I, the teacher, not give you an A+, even if someone else's best work was clearly, quote, better, but they had more ability than you did in doing that best work. So here, what this makes me think of is if a person is already going through the process of making sure that they are being careful to count every 10th animal and set it aside for an offering, that's what makes it holy. It's the interaction with the ritual, with the experience. It's not the animal self. That to me makes this much more, I don't know. I don't feel the need to push this kind of information aside as quickly and just say, oh, well, Leviticus is weird, so we're just going to move on. But it seems to really remind us that, it's like Rabbi Dorf's prayer analogy, right? You need to show up to the prayer experience to feel like you're going to have opportunities to make your prayer experiences special. You can't just assume that by praying harder, your prayer experiences are going to be special. So that's what came to mind for me. It's a little bit more drashy than it is pshat, but yeah. And Rabbi Shapiro wants me to say chazak, chazak, benit, chazek. So I am saying that. Do you have any last words, Rabbi Shapiro?
Chazak, chazak, benit, chazek.
Always great to have a little singing by Rabbi Matt Shapiro to lead us into Shabbat. Yeah, so I guess, okay, I will. If you're not going to end, I will.
It did end. That was the end. What
I guess I will just.
Thus ends Leviticus.
I guess, yeah, exactly. I guess I'll just say that I hope that, especially with this week upon us as the first week that we're bringing people back into our sanctuary, that we recognize that just being back in spaces, or just trying something for whether it's the 100th time or the first time, that it might not be exactly what you expect, but just having that moment, having that experience, that's what's going to make it holy. And so being able to just be in those moments and recognize that it might be the next time you count to 10, that you get it right and that it is exactly the right one, but according to the Torah and to God, I would hope that it's not about it being accurate, but about showing up. Shabbat shalom, everybody.
Chazak, chazak, benit, chazek.
Shabbat shalom.
Chazak, chazak, benit, chazek. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Thank you.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.